So let me say welcome to everybody and how grateful I am to all of you for coming today for what is actually our fifth annual Clyde Littlefield Lecture. So for those of you who have been around the University of Texas, the name Clyde Littlefield probably has some connections for you. You might think about Clyde Littlefield, who was the track and field coach, and you might think about the fact that we actually have things on this campus that are named for Clyde Littlefield, including Clyde Littlefield Way, a street that now comes in off of the highway and brings us here. So the person that we're honoring, though, is actually not the man who was the great football coach and then track coach at UT and starts the Texas Relays. Today's lecture is really in honor of his son, whose name was Clyde Brad Littlefield. He was not junior, and he would be the first one to remind you that he was never junior. And I knew Clyde well. And Clyde was a University of Texas student. His father was the famous football coach. And Clyde was studied history here at the University of Texas and then had a career in the military where he was actually a military historian. He then retired, came back to Austin, started buying real estate, and at the time of his death, he left his entire estate to the University of Texas. So that included a building on downtown on Congress Avenue, a lot of apartments and things out around campus and West Campus. And that estate was then divided between a number of different entities on campus, including the H.J. Lutcher Stark Center, which I run, and which is actually sponsoring this event today. So we are very, very grateful to Clyde, and I know that he would be really happy today to be here to hear this presentation, which I think is a little bit different than what we're doing normally. We have both an important and new book that has come up, but we also have with us some of the people whose lives directly are impacted by that book. So I think you're in for a sort of a little bit of a mixed media message today. So with that, I'm going to turn over this mic to Dr. Charles Stocking and ask him to say the introductions. And he will then introduce Michael Gross. Michael will then talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. And then we have two of the world's strongest men. We actually have four of the world's strongest men in the room with us today, because we have two. So we got sort of like double. It's like double your pleasure, double your fun. And that, body weight, I think that also works into the doubles. But anyway, I'll introduce them after Michael's talk, and then we'll do a big Q&A section, and where you can start thinking already about, like, what would you like to ask the strongest man in the world? Because the guy who really is currently the strongest man in the world is sitting right here in the front row finishing up his popcorn. So with that, Dr. Charles Stocking, Department of Kinesiology.
Thanks so much, Jan, and thank you everybody for coming. This is really a tremendous opportunity and a sort of, I think, a hybrid and really special moment, as Jan mentioned, to have, a popular trade paperback book coming out, as well as, several of the world's strongest men here in an academic setting. It's really a sort of incredible historical moment. And I think it's one that Jan and Terry have been working on for a long time, this idea of making, or I should say the idea of taking muscle seriously, right? To make muscle an object of study in an academic setting, but also for those who are practicing it, and bridging that gap between the academic study, the practice of it in everyday life, and also how it actually affects our everyday lives. And I think the person who's really done that in an incredible way is Michael Gross with his book Strongly. It's a great pleasure to introduce Michael to you all. He's a very accomplished author who's written on a range of topics, from serious issues in terms of espionage and cybersecurity to less serious but equally important issues concerning celebrity nudes and Queen Elizabeth's corgis. So very wide range of field of topics. And I still recall when Michael first called me, or Todd wanted to talk to me about muscle and strength, and way back in 2016, actually. And as a trained academic, I was very wary of anybody who was writing anything popular, and I was very worried about being misquoted and whether or not they understood things. And there's this general mistrust. But he won me over, obviously. And getting to talk to him and getting to think with him, and I realized that this was not just a traditional author or somebody who was just, writing puff pieces, even if he does like to do that on the side as well. He was asking really strange and interesting questions about strength, and strange and interesting questions about muscle, and really thinking historically. And he actually really helped me to think historically, and helped in my own thoughts about it. And he was connecting a lot of dots in a lot of different ways between the work that I do, which is mostly on the ancient traditions of strength training, exercise, the history of sport, and how it affects us, to Jan's work, who is also just a part of the history of women in muscle and women in strength, to Maria's work on aging and muscle, connecting all of these in different ways. I think there was this really interesting way in which Michael sort of helped us to see, or helps us to appreciate, that muscle is in a lot of ways the silent partner in all of human history, right? It's there all the time. It's been there always. And not just in human history from the beginning to the end, but it's also the silent partner in all of our lives, right? In how we live our everyday lives. And what Michael did, and what I think is really impressive, is that he actually gave a voice to muscle. He gave a voice to this silent partner, and he lets it speak, and sort of did that through the interviews and through the research that he did, which was tremendous. I mean, really, he probably earned at least 3 different PhDs in writing this book, between the amount of work he's done. And so I'm just really excited to sort of to introduce him to you. And I would say, I said I was a little bit weary of him, or not weary, wary of him. Uh, these days, perhaps, after, way back in 2016. But I do remember I invited him to Olympia, and that's actually when he finally convinced me to be an official part of the book. I wanted to be outside. I didn't want to have a voice. I just wanted to be silently advising him. And I saw him give a talk. I invited him to the ancient archaeological site of Olympia, and he almost brought me to tears about muscle, right? And that's a sort of weird thing, because we don't take it that seriously. And he showed how meaningful it was, and it's something that I know I've dedicated my life to, and Jan has, and Maria, and a lot of people in this room. And to spread the word on the importance of it, I think, is a really invaluable contribution. So with that, I'd like to thank Michael and introduce him. So come on up, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Charles. Thank you all for coming. I'm so happy to be here, so honored to be here with you after all this time, which really started here with Jan and Terry. And that's right. Jan tried to escape my clutches too. Yeah. But here we all are. And I would like to start by asking you to come back in time with me, way back. We are in the ancient Greek colony of Croton now. We're on the southeast coast of present-day Italy, and it's the 6th century BC. In the grassy field, the man walked toward the grazing calf. He picked it up. The small hooves swung slightly in the air, then came back down flat on the dirt. The rest of that day, and again the next day, the calf kept grazing, filling up with grass, and the man walked across the field again and hoisted up the calf again and set it down again. Every day he lifted the calf until the calf became a bull. And the man became so strong that his tail still survives. The myth of Milo, the strongman of Croton. Milo was a real person, 6-time Olympic victor in wrestling, the most celebrated athlete of antiquity. The tale about him and the calf is fiction, but in modern times, some have made it true, or as true as it can be. One who makes the story true in the 1930s AD is a teenager in Birmingham, Alabama. The young man, Thomas Lanier DeLorme, falls ill. Doctors diagnose him with rheumatic fever, an inflammatory disease believed to weaken the heart, and they order him to rest. While spending 4 whole months in bed, to pass the time, he reads a magazine, Strength and Health, full of facts about exercise, the fables of strongmen, such as Milo of Croton. Inspired, he gets well enough to wander local junkyards, searching for machine parts, and from the junk he builds himself a barbell, and with the barbell he gradually builds up his strength. The young man who grew strong by lifting weights becomes a doctor in the United States Army Medical Corps, and in 1944 he goes to work in a Chicago military hospital full of wounded soldiers. Orthopedic surgeons fix the soldiers' injured legs, but after surgeries, healing is slow. Can Dr. DeLorme do something to help them heal faster? He has an idea, but it is risky. At a time when mainstream doctors say weak muscles should never be challenged to work near their limited strength, Thomas DeLorme bucks the system. For rehab after surgery, he prescribes standard dosages of strenuous weight training based on a technique of testing maximal exertion, or effort. And his prescriptions work. But they create a problem, too. In 1945, in his first published paper on the regimen, he names it as heavy resistance exercises. And he soon finds out that heavy is too hard a word for most people to swallow. The word heavy, DeLorme later writes, bears false implications. Talk of heavy resistance exercises seems to imply that the quality of strength is absolute, not relative, and that is incorrect. Resistance is heavy, DeLorme writes, only when the patient's actual amount of muscle power is considered. His words now. For instance, a few ounces would be as heavy for a severely weakened muscle in a person who had survived polio as 50 or 100 pounds would be for a normal muscle. No matter how he tries to redefine the word heavy, though, DeLorme finds that his medical colleagues are not comfortable prescribing heavy weightlifting. So he talks about the problem with his wife Eleanor, who thinks DeLorme should just give the technique a new name. Decades later, she will tell the historians Jan Todd and Terry Todd that she, Eleanor, suggested the new name, progressive resistance exercise. In the history of strength training, this turn of phrase proves to be a pivotal event. The shift in language from challenge to invitation, changing heavy resistance exercise to progressive resistance exercise, makes it easier for more people to imagine themselves lifting weights. Unquestionably, it is a decisive step towards showing how lifting can help everyone, not just athletes, but even people who are sick or old or frail, to win the victories that enliven our days. Years later, after the whole U.S. Army hospital system has adopted his technique, after his prescription has been used to rehabilitate victims of the terrible polio epidemic, and it proves to be safe, feasible, and effective for women and men, adolescents and adults. After the doctor has retired from the Army, he reflects on his revolutionary treatment, giving credit where he thinks it's due. Glancing back through time, DeLorme tips his cap to Milo. He writes, "For centuries, it has been known that if a person lifts progressively larger loads, the muscles in response will hypertrophy and increase in strength. By dramatizing the ancient history of weight training and athletics, Delorme gave the technique a luster of distinction to help secure its future in medicine, where they love all things ancient Greek. In the following decades, this one doctor's technical and rhetorical breakthroughs helped to ease a great deal of suffering. Delorme's studies set an example of experimentation for other doctors whose research on weight training as a type of medicine has revealed its potential to be even more broadly transformative than Delorme may have imagined. Still today, when talking about such programs, the doctors who run them sometimes say they carry on what they call the ancient training methods of Milo. Although the story of Milo is not fully accurate, physiologically or historically. Physiologically, this story fails because if you keep lifting a calf every day until the calf becomes a bull, your body will break. Because strength does not build in a perfectly linear fashion on a steady upward curve. The Milo myth is great for helping us remember that strength is progressive, but the Milo myth falls short in failing to acknowledge that strength is also cyclical. And we'll come back to that in a minute. As to the question of history, nothing from before or during Milo's lifetime, or many centuries that follow, provides any real details about how athletes may have trained in a regular way by lifting heavy weights. The tale of Milo lifting the calf is probably the earliest glimpse in literature of anything like a modern regimen of progressive resistance exercise, and no one told this tale, as far as can be proven, until about 500 years after Milo died. Curious about the myth of Milo's training, Charles Saki learned that it grew from one line in a Roman textbook written in the 1st century AD. The textbook is not about athletics or exercise. It's a textbook of rhetoric, and the relevant passage has nothing to do with athletic training. As an aside, almost a throwaway, the author noted that some people, when giving public speeches, were liable to relate little anecdotes for no reason, with the vaguest semblance of a connection to their main topics. Then he gave, as an example of random things that blowhards like to drop into their speeches, the following remark. Milo carried a bull, which he had been accustomed to carry as a calf. But the myth of Milo keeps on giving energy to our training and to medical research on muscle that changes lives. To see what I mean, let's go back now to the year 1990, to a nursing home in Boston, the Hebrew Rehabilitation Center for Aged, which is a mouthful. So it's affectionately nicknamed Hebrew Rehab by residents and staff. One of the residents of Hebrew Rehab is Helene Freundlich, an articulate, wheelchair-bound Holocaust survivor who loves the symphony and wears big glasses with cat's eye frames. Helene's 96 years old in 1990 when Maria Fiatarone, a young medical doctor, a geriatrician specializing in the treatment of old people, teams up with Evelyn O'Neill, a nursing home worker, to enroll 100 nursing home residents as volunteers in the first large randomized controlled trial of high-intensity strength training for people who are very old and frail. This research is directly inspired by the work of Thomas Delorme. And when Fiatarone begins her research on high-intensity strength training for frail older people, many of her colleagues consider it to be at least as risky as Delorme's original experiments with heavyweight training for orthopedic rehab, because conventional wisdom in the 1990s had it that heavy lifting put a dangerous strain on older people's hearts. Well, Helene Freundlich is brave. She is one of the first to volunteer for this new strength training study. Judging by appearances, though, most people would not see Helene Freundlich as a good prospect for high-intensity training. She is incapacitated. She is undernourished. Her upper body is so weak that she can lift no more than the weight of her own 2 arms. Yet, where others see only weakness, Maria Fiatarone and Evelyn O'Neill see potential strength. They encourage Helene to start strength training by doing what she can do. And so, in the beginning, for upper body training, Helene Freundlich's arms are the heavy weight she lifts. For lower body training, the study's focus, Helene faces bigger challenges. Because she cannot stand up on her own, each training session begins with her being helped out of her wheelchair and into a special kind of leg press machine, then a special kind of leg extension machine, both of which provide resistance with a pneumatic system of compressed air. These machines make high-intensity strength training feasible for the oldest, frailest people, geriatricians have found, because resistance can be dialed down to as little as 1/10 of a pound, allowing Helene Freundlich to follow the strength training principle of progression in a way that makes the myth of Milo of Crotona as true as it can be. These machines also happen to be favorites of professional athletes because the same button that turns it down to 1/10 of a pound can turn it up to 1,200 pounds. The New England Journal of Medicine published the study results in 1994. A group of residents who lifted weights increased their strength by 100%. A group of residents who lifted weights and took a nutritional supplement increased their strength by 250%. Strength training for everyone increased walking speed, stair climbing power, and spontaneous physical activity. The ones who lifted weights just started walking around, moving around the nursing home more than they did before. Training and taking the supplement increased all these measures slightly more. No residents recovered so much function that they were able to leave the nursing home, but no one had been expecting time would run backward. Fiatarone and O'Neill hoped that training would improve the residents' abilities to act upon the world and more independently navigate the place where they lived, and that is what happened. 4 people who used walkers at the start of the study were afterwards able to walk with only the help of a cane. Helene Freundlich, who showed up for every training session in the 10-week study, as Evelyn O'Neill remembers, regained so much strength she was no longer dependent on her wheelchair. O'Neill says that seeing Helene able to walk again with a walker and do things for herself was a joy. I think that's what the study gave to a lot of people, O'Neill adds. Freedom to feel strong again. To help frail older people persist in training, Evelyn O'Neill says, she learned to emphasize that strength is cyclical, not linear. Strength ebbs and flows with all the unexpected turns of life, as O'Neill explained to me, saying, the residents go in the hospital, they get pneumonia, their cats get sick, and then they don't sleep, so they get sick. O'Neill is there through it all to remind them, okay, so we back off, but then I know you're going to get your strength back. I know you're going to feel better physically. The illness will subside and then we can start again. Helene started again many times and never gave up. She celebrated her 100th birthday with a birthday cake in the Hebrew rehab gym. And she kept lifting weights until she died at the age of 103. The story of Helene Freundlich shows that it's never too late to get strong. With creativity and determination and help, there's always something you can do to improve your situation, no matter how dire it may seem. Now to wrap things up, I want to draw a line from that old woman in a wheelchair in Boston to another young Olympic wrestler in ancient Greece, but not Milo of Crotona. This last story comes from the sole surviving training manual from antiquity, the Gymnasticus of Philostratus, who was born in Athens around 170 AD. In the story Philostratus tells, there's a wrestler named Geriatrician. He's a great wrestler, an Olympic champion. He wins victory at Olympia, and then to celebrate, he goes on a massive bender. Gets drunk and stays drunk for quite some time. Then he shows up for training, and his coach is furious. Does this guy have no respect for authority? The coach has a whole workout planned out for Geriatrician, and he decides he's going to teach him a lesson. They're going to stick to that plan, force Geriatrician to tough it out, and that turns out to be a mistake. The athlete's body, normally so strong, just can't take it today. Geriatrician keeps trying harder, but the stress of that training session is too much for him. And in the middle of the workout, Geriatrician dies. Philostratus tells this story to teach his readers about the difference between bad trainers and good trainers. Bad trainers treat training like it's a formula or a recipe, and they always follow their own scripts. Good trainers, I will quote from Charles Stocking's translation here, do not train by prescription, but provide exercises all improvised for the right time. Now the key word there, translated as time, is in Greek kairos. And if you only remember one word from everything I've said today, let kairos be it. There's no exact equivalent in English, but Stocking interprets it as meaning the window of time or opportunity to act. Another scholar calls it the ability to recognize the right moment and, knowing that moment, to take decisive action. Kairos basically means doing the right thing at the right time. And the same way Milo's story helps us remember the principle of progression, the story of Geriatrician and the concept of kairos can help us respect the cyclical nature of strength and the endless adaptability of training. Kairos reminds us that good training is not following a formula or recipe. It's an endless adventure of improvisation based on knowledge in respect of the reality of our body's condition on any given day. The Kairos principle can be a godsend for each person's individual experience of training. It has much broader implications too, for our communities, our nations, our world. Research on the epidemiology of exercise, epidemiology being the study in human populations of frequencies or distributions of disease or behavior in terms of time, place, and personal characteristics. Epidemiology shows that strength training and a bigger focus on muscle in our lives is the right thing for our time now. Of the various modes of exercise, strength training is the one that the fewest people do. And some demographics of people who stand to gain the most from doing it such as women and older people and people with chronic diseases, are among the past few decades. Medical research like the study at Hebrew Rehab has continued Thomas DeLorme's work of helping more people to imagine themselves lifting weights. And there's sufficient interest in that Jan and Terry Todd's definitive study of Thomas DeLorme is Jan Todd's most cited academic paper. Now, in the mainstream of athletics, the same kind of progress has been much faster and more dramatic. Athletes such as Jan Todd set examples for other women to realize their own potential strength and find the freedom, the many kinds of freedom that come with it. Jan Todd once said about weight training, "The main thing it has done for me is that I don't have a sense of limitations. I feel so free." What I'm trying to say here is that nobody owns strength, because everybody owns strength. Because strength is relative. Young champions in their moments of glory, hoisting hundreds of pounds above their heads, probably have more in common than might first be clear when you take a look at the old woman who struggles to lift the weight of her own 2 arms above her head, but shows up every day and does it until she can do a little more. I wonder, and I want you to wonder with me for just a minute here at the end, how the world might look different if every time we heard someone say the word strong or muscle, our imaginations conjured up the strong men and the grandmothers, both at the same time.
Huh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shifting gears slightly, I'm going to ask for a little technical support here in case we need it. But I did want to say one thing first, and I want to thank Michael, obviously, for the very kind words, and actually that really lovely talk. The thing that I wanted to just mention is that we actually had a third author on the DeLorme paper, and I just wanted to make sure that we give him full credit. And that is Jason Sherwood, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater. And I think that his mom and dad are here today, and so please tell Jason that I did not throw him under the bus and not let him be known. I'm really glad to see you all for being here. Thank you.
Please tell Jason I apologize. My oversight. And
You know, his hearing always sucked out of the air, all the air out of the room. So, yeah. So what I want to do now is shift gears a little bit, and I love where we are. But I want to talk now a little bit about what it means to be strong to somebody who's still living right now. And I want to open this conversation in a way with a little bit of video, if we can make it work, and introduce the 2 people that I asked to come in as my special guests. And they are friends of mine. And I'll maybe just take 1 second to explain how I became friends with these 2 gentlemen, and also with some other people who are in the room today. And that is that in 2002, my husband Terry was invited by Arnold to start a professional strongman contest. And of course, as academics, this was like, well, that would be an interesting sort of challenge. How would you do that? And how would you try to create a test that actually, a series of events that actually tested strength? Because obviously we already had World's Strongest Man, but this was a kind of an interesting sort of moment for us. I never had any idea, like a lot of other things in my life, that it would then become one of the main things that I get known for, and also sort of it consumes my life. But it has been a remarkably rewarding thing for me to do. And it's not just because of the friendships that it's created, but it's also because it's allowed me, as somebody who is an academic who studies strength, to actually watch what's happening in this world, in this space, which is changing all the time, and training is changing all the time. And most surprisingly to me is like people are now lifting things and breaking records and pressing the limits of what's humanly possible in ways that I could never have imagined when I started lifting weights back in 1973. So you can do the math on that. That was a long, long time ago. But at the Arnold this year, we had a woman who deadlifted 676 pounds. Think about that. We had many women there, probably 5 different athletes in that contest who did repetitions in the deadlift with more than 600 pounds. The strength of women compared to what we used to think was humanly possible for women is phenomenal. And I think this is just my little personal soapbox for just a few seconds, but I think that that has to do with the fact that it's finally, we've kind of come to a point where we realize it is actually okay for women to be strong. Like, it's the one physical characteristic in our bodies. Like, nobody would ever say to a woman these days, don't run too fast because it's not feminine to run fast. But we still say, don't have too much muscle, or you don't want to lift too much, because there's still something that somehow means that you're not a woman if you do that. But I do think we're changing that narrative. That paradigm is shifting. It's not quite all the way gone, but I think that I think the strong women, the power lifters, the Olympic weightlifters of the modern era are doing things that I could not imagine when I began lifting weights back in 1973. And so now I want to turn to my 2 friends who are here and introduce first Martins Licis, who is, we're going to show, and I'm going to show a little short video again, if you can make it work, and I will, but let me first introduce Martins. So Martins has won both the Arnold Strongman Classic. There are 2 great strongman contests. There's the World's Strongest Man, which you see on television, and then we have the Arnold Strongman Classic. Arnold is a heavier show by most people's standards, and most of the guys here in the room would agree on that, because these 4 guys, or 3 of the 4 guys sitting out here in the front, just competed in it with me up in Columbus, Ohio. But the World's Strongest Man has this longer history. And so Martins has won both of those events, and he now has, and I just want to give a little shout out to what he's doing these days, which makes my heart really happy. Martins is now going around the world and studying the history of strength. He has been in places like Pakistan and India and Mongolia and Japan. And in fact, Dr. Tanaka has actually helped him in the past with sort of connecting with people. But he's going and then making videos out of that, and on his YouTube channel called Strength Unknown. And if you have never seen it, I really urge you to watch these. They will blow you away. Because the thing about Martins is that he's able not only to understand and appreciate the history of this, but he's also then able to sort of like get right in there and do it with them. And that's really the interesting part. So let's see if we can make this work, Charles. And there may be, so we're watching Martins now in 2021. And this is at the Rogue Invitational here in Austin, Texas. Is the current winner of the Arnold Strongman Classic, which he won 2 weeks ago in Columbus, Ohio. He also won the Rogue Invitational a little bit earlier, in about a couple months ago. He has won World's Strongest Man. He's actually the 3-time winner of the Arnold, and no one has ever come into the sport of strongman and ascended to the top of the mountain so quickly. He is an amazing athlete and performer of strength events in different kind. And tomorrow we're going to take him to Dr. Tanaka's lab, where we're going to actually put him through a battery of tests done by exercise physiologists, and we're going to find out a little bit more about what it is about his physical makeup that makes him not only so super strong, but also so enduring, because his CV capacities and his ability to he does things that a lot of other strongmen really just can't do. So let us watch a little bit of him in action. This is the video from this year's, the top reel from this year's Arnold Strongman Classic. And this is over now.
No, this is.
So this is an over 1,000-pound deadlift he just did.
Boy. Right, well, first of all, thanks to Michael and Jack for doing this together, getting everyone in the room. One time for bringing strength to the mainstream. Just one round of applause. I don't think Jan initially knew, and Michael definitely doesn't know, how much I'm tied into the purpose of the book and what it ended up being. So I did my undergraduate degree in human genetics. I worked as a strength and conditioning coach, and I thought that would be a dream job. It turned out at the end of the season, it was with a basketball team. It just didn't feel like I made a difference in the world, and so I wanted to do something that meant a bit more. And the only thing that I loved was the gym. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to use exercise as medicine to help people exercise and be well. And so I went to the University of Sydney to do my master's degree in clinical exercise physiology. When I did that, one of my professors was Maria Fiatarone. And she gave me the lecture exactly what you were talking about, of how old people get resistance training, they can improve their lives and improve their well-being. Mm-hmm. During that time, I was doing some research into how important this actually is, because on the surface, lifting weight really doesn't matter too much. You hold a trophy, you win some money, and a few people are impressed, and maybe they're inspired, and that's great. But it returned me to the initial feeling where if I win the show, or teams win the show, some people are happy, some people are sad, but ultimately some people will be inspired and some people won't be. And so I tried to find a deeper meaning to this. And when I did, I found research that showed that in the past 25 years in North America, we've added 3 years to lifespan, but we've added 0 years to health-adjusted lifespan. So when we think of every medical advancement, ultimately the only thing we get back to is how can we improve lifestyle interventions to be able to have people live well forever. And so I brought that back to Canada. I know in a clinic that's exercise is medicine for people who are elderly, injured, and have chronic disease. And ultimately, the number one thing that I hope that you guys take away is this is not really about lifting weights. This is about improving your life to become one of those people who lives until whatever age you want to live to, and the day that you lose your independence is the day that you die. I see, unfortunately, a fair number of people who have outlived their health span, meaning that they cannot exist independently anymore. And I'm sure many people in this room know these people, and unfortunately, they have no choice but to wake up, and they'd rather not. Now, the research that I know here as Dr. Singh, but Dr. Fiatarone, the research that she did unveils something really interesting about people losing their independence. And while most people might think it's a chronic disease, it's diabetes, it's losing feeling in their feet, it's some grand problem, it actually turns out to be the strength of one muscle, and that's the tricep. And if you have strong triceps, that's what helps you push out of a chair, that's what helps you push yourself out of a car, and that's what helps you live independently. So whilst we can talk about aerobic fitness, which is historically the most popular form of exercise, as Michael pointed out, the thing that's actually going to get us to what most people's ultimate end goal of living all the way to the point where they can't do everything that they want to, it's in fact getting stronger. The research around preventing diabetes and preventing heart disease is more about getting stronger and resistance training than it actually is about your aerobic capacity, because muscle is metabolically active tissue and that's how you stay healthy for a long time. So this is a huge passion of mine that I don't know how much Jan knows about, and I don't know how much Michael knows about, but I'm really, really happy to be here, happy to be a part of what I hope to be a very popular book that hopefully gets people inspired. Because ultimately, we don't want to be thinking about getting strong when we're 75, 80, 90, and we're close to losing capacity, although we can do great things with that group of people. We want to focus on these things when we're as young as possible. And I've spent many dinner arguments with my mom, who's in her mid-50s. She's not, but we'll say she is. When I say you need to resistance train to get strong so you maintain your independence. And she will lecture me on how she has her independence. And that's the reason why that's the time that you need to prevent it. When we think about women and osteoporosis, the best time to prevent that is by resistance training in your late teens. When we think about the peak bone density, it's only going downhill after 20 years old. It falls off a cliff after menopause. So if you have a teenage daughter, or you are an undergraduate student, you're a master's student, any age is the time to get strong. And I think that's probably the most important takeaway, is that there's never a time too early to start. There's never a time where it's unsafe. There's never a time where it's not appropriate. And you can really impact your life forever. And ultimately, that selfish decision to be strong yourself, to take that time away from your family, to go to the gym, becomes a very unselfish decision when you're the person who can support them for 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years to come. So again, thank you very much to Jan and Michael for bringing me out. We'll do a bit of Q&A now, I suppose. And thanks to all of you for coming as well.
So the plan here is to open this up to the floor for questions, but I thought that I would also, before I do that, introduce a couple other people that I see in the room who also could have been up here on the stage with us. And I just wanted to, two of them are, we have, by the way, at the Arnold this year, we had three competitors from Texas. Two of them are in the room with me today. So if I could have Austin Andrade stand up. Austin took Austin is Nick Carrion, who was the newcomer to Nick was an amateur who moved up to the pros with his time at the Arnold and did just a really, really great show. And then there's somebody else a little further back in the room who is the 2002 winner of the Arnold Strongman Classic. That would be Mark Henry. Can you stand up, Mark? In case you don't know, if you've been listening to the radio in the morning as you're driving into work on 1300 The Zone, is it Mark and Mike in the morning or Mike and Mark in the morning? It's something.
It don't matter.
It doesn't matter. But actually on Thursday morning, Mark is going to have our guests on his radio show. And if you want to keep up with Longhorn sports, I do give a little shout out. It's really been fun to listen to them on the radio. So we have a lot of people in this room who have at one time or another set records, different kinds. We have a lot of people who have trained and tried to get themselves into sort of a competitive phase. And I just wanted to ask if I could throw this one to Martins. When did you know you were strong?
Oh, what a question. Before I even knew I was strong, I just knew I was curious about strength.
Okay.
I would say what the human body could do. And then the passion grew from that. And I would say probably when I was 13, 14, I started noticing, okay, I think I'm getting stronger than all the adults in the gym. There might be something here.
So, and I was going to say, Michael, you had a personal journey with strength yourself in terms of you started training, and that was one of the inspirations for doing the book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was a contributing editor at Vanity Fair for many years, doing investigative pieces about some pretty dark stuff sometimes, like Charles mentioned at the beginning, technology and national security. There came a point where, to get out of my head, I needed a new physical challenge. And so I decided to learn whitewater kayaking. But I knew that I needed to get stronger so that I could handle myself at the river. So I started going to the gym in a more serious way than I had before. And I was just really fascinated by the way it changed me. And I looked for good books to read about that. Something like Born to Run was for endurance running. And I just couldn't find anything about lifting that had that kind of richness and depth. So I had to write it.
So I was going to tell you all that when I first started talking to Michael, I think it was 2015, not 2016, and he had contacted me, and he told me that he had read a book that I wrote about the history of women's exercise in the 19th century, which was actually my dissertation. And he asked a very nice phone call, and I was like, he wanted to come down and interview me, and I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, and have you read other stuff? And I tend to sort of push people away sometimes on those things. And anyway, and so he was very kind, and then called me back 9 to 12 months later, and he said, I think I've now read everything you've written, which is a very scary thing, but I think it also speaks to the approach with which he wrote this book. And so if you actually look at the organization of the book and how it's put together, don't skip the footnoting in the back where all the sources are, because it'll blow you away. It is just a monumental effort. And what Charles said about the action probably could have been a dissertation. If he'd been my student, we would have let him out like 5 years ago, but he would have been off at some other university by now. So, questions from the floor. What do you guys want to know? Yes. Charles will bring the mic. Oh, sorry.
I think this question is for Michael. Since you've written about a broad range of topics over the years, my question has to do with does getting stronger increase the ability of a person to optimize their fast twitch fibers? And I'm asking as a pre-question to, do you think Barry Bonds should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
So I think it's actually more a question for Mitch than it is for me. The fast twitch, slow twitch thing is highly controversial, and we wouldn't want to have Reggie Edgerton in the room if we were trying to talk about that. Mitch will have much more current knowledge on that than I will, and I don't know a thing about baseball.
Well, you're hitting 100 miles an hour a little ball.
Oh, it's that one.
Yeah.
I think, to tackle the Barry Bonds thing, I think everyone wants to see baseballs hit harder, so let's just let them fly. Okay. But in terms of fast twitch muscle fibers, I'll give a more broad stroke answer to this. People overcomplicate training dramatically and the impact that it might have on them moving forward. People like myself and Martins and other professional athletes have to carefully consider what rep ranges are we doing and when are we doing it, what are our rest days and what's our tempo, and et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to the average person, if you're resistance training to any degree, you will be adding muscle tissue. That muscle tissue will be disproportionately fast twitch muscle fiber. And there's even a range of muscle fibers, just not fast twitch and slow twitch. Within slow twitch, we have type 2A fibers, which are effectively the slowest of the slow twitch, all the way to 2X, which are the most powerful of the slow twitch. So the effect is not necessarily changing slow to fast, but it's changing slower slow twitch to faster slow twitch. And that's actually extraordinarily important. Because when you think about aging, one of the biggest problems is that you lose the connection and the speed of the connection from your brain to your body, and then when your body goes to execute that movement becomes very slow. So while we've all seen an elderly person sort of stumble, and you're like, why are you moving so slow? Try not to fall. That's the fastest that they can move. And when it comes to, say, osteoporosis, hip fracture, falls risk, There's three independent variables. One is osteoporosis and bone density. Another is muscular power, and the other is balance. And power and balance kind of go hand in hand. Are you strong enough to be able to limit those things? And whilst most people in this room feel like this conversation isn't relevant to them, it is absolutely relevant to you at any age. So yes, if you go resistance train and you work hard, you will build fast twitch muscle fibers, and you will promote fast twitch muscle fibers, which are the fastest ones you lose as you get older. But to round out the answer, people who are sedentary, who take up running, will gain muscle mass in the first 4 to 8 weeks of that new aerobic protocol. So it's actually so much less complicated than you think. Should I do 1 rep or 20 reps or 5 reps or go for a run? Ultimately, it boils down to what are you going to stick to and what will you enjoy? Do that and work hard at it, and you'll achieve the goal of fast twitch muscle fibers.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Right here? Share the microphone. Thank you.
It's your turn, buddy. You Mitchell, you said that there's no age limit for getting stronger, and there's no good time or bad time to start. I would disagree as far as the not using me as an example because I started at 10, but my growth plates I didn't set, and I know the growth plates don't set and usually till you're about 12 years old. Do you think that it's a hazard to start lifting before you're 12?
Unequivocally, no. And I have enough academics in the room to back me up on that. It has nothing to do with your growth plates. The injury risk of resistance training is less than any other sport. So if we're thinking of protected growth plates, if a kid playing football fractures his femur on the growth plate, his femur will never grow, and that's a major risk. When it comes to lifting, if you're a boy before you're 13 years old, a lot of the adaptation comes from a neurological component. So you're not actually going to start building muscle, but it is 100% safe so long as it's done safely. Just like playing any other sport, the caveat is so long as it's done safely. But it's a very common fallacy, a misnomer that resistance training has any impact on growth plates. And Mark, if your growth plates were messed up, they seem just fine.
I'll definitely add to that. I started when I was 9 years old, and I'm not sure about the science behind it, but I also started purely focusing on technique and form and not pushing myself too intensely, but the strength still grew, and obviously so did I.
First, just want to say congrats on winning the honor recently. My question's a little less academic, but as a fan of Strongman, a fan of both of your guys' YouTube channels, do you find that doing YouTube and Strongman at the same time makes it more difficult, or does it make it more fun to kind of do both?
Good question.
Well, when I first started YouTube, I would say it had me really assess even more so what I was doing every day at the gym, because I knew that so many more people were watching me. So in that way, it actually helped. But I also was very lucky because my good friend and business partner was my videographer. His name is Mark Weiss. We're still doing this together. And in the beginning, it was just him putting a camera on me, and whatever happened. And it didn't take much out of me. And I think it helped me in my journey.
Yeah, I think the stuff that you see me do, it's sort of the tip of the iceberg of ways in which I stopped myself from being as best as I possibly could be in the sport of strongman. But I can't ethically say that my goal is not to be the greatest strongman in the world in the traditional sense, but be the greatest strongman in the world in the sense of inspiring as many people as possible to get out and be healthy and exercise and move and weight train to their own degree. I don't know how I could say that and then shy away from this incredible opportunity when people are going to listen, and those days are numbered, of course, or at least they're numbered if you don't take advantage of it. So yes, it provides a lot of challenge, but a lot of my life isn't structured around avoiding challenge. And if I stopped YouTube, I would probably be marginally better at strongman. But for the moment, I don't need to be marginally better.
Other questions from the audience? Right there. Thank you. And I saw a hand back in the back too.
So how has your training philosophy changed from when you were starting to take strongman seriously to now having won some competitions?
Who is that for?
Or I guess both of you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I've pulled back a bit from competing. My body's a bit beat up. I've been taking on more jujitsu, so the way I train has completely changed. But of course, it'll always be part of my life. So to answer your question, it's changed drastically. But throughout my competitive years, my top years, I would say it always changed relative to whatever obstacle I was facing. And that could be injury, it could be my body weight, it could be how my strength is being affected by my body weight, it could be based on the competition I'm facing. In the beginning, I had great endurance and I was very fast, but my static strength was far behind. So I put all my focus on bringing up my static strength, my body weight. As my weight came on, more injuries accrued, and then I found myself focusing on physical therapy a lot more. And yeah, so it's always changing, and that goes right back to what Michael was saying. It's cyclical, and I'm always adapting it to whatever position my body's in or wherever I'm at with how I'm feeling and what I'm faced with.
So Martins, let me ask you a real quick question as a follow-up to that, if I can. And do you think that, I think that some of the people in this room have obviously lifted weights at what I would call the extreme edge of possibilities. In other words, human possibility. And so do you think that if you had trained in a different way, you would have as many injuries as you have now?
I do look back, and I think I've made some mistakes when I was younger, thinking I was invincible, pushing myself to the absolute limit. And I do wonder if I could go back and change how I approach it, how I would be feeling, and where I'd be at now.
Yeah, I'd say in ways it's changed. I was really lucky, as Jan said, to come up through strongman faster than the vast majority of people. And so I was never sort of indoctrinated into how strongmen are supposed to do things. So I think all of the strongmen in the room can sort of attest to that. I just do things differently, and I behave differently, and I have different thoughts around, say, recovery and training, etc. But I think when you become an expert, which I suppose I can start to claim, when you become an expert in a field, it's almost like you start with like this really simple foundation, and with resistance training, it's, well, if you work relatively hard, you'll continue making progress. And then you'll go and you'll think you're getting so much smarter, and you'll come up with all these caveats of how many reps and what's your rest time and your rest days and your tempos and your particular accessories, on and on and on. And then as you think you get smarter and smarter, you return back to this same principle of like, well, if you just work generally hard at the movement patterns that you're trying to execute, you don't get hurt, you don't burn yourself out, you don't work too hard, you're probably going to get to where you need to go. So my training philosophy has probably simplified over time rather than complicated. And that's my advice. If any questions come up of how do you improve your deadlift, or how do you get stronger, how do you this, well, take the thing you want to do, try to do it, fail a couple of times, work hard at it, and you'll probably get better. And that's lifting and life and business and whatever endeavor you undertake.
Is there other questions? Right here? Michael's. And then there was somebody in the back. Let me go back to her first, if I can.
This is for both of y'all. I was just wondering, have you guys broken the record? Oh, I'm sorry. Have you guys already broken the world record on your own personal training time before we see it on TV, or are we seeing you break your own personal record?
As a principle, I won't break a world record in the gym, because what a shame it would be to do it and have it not count for anything. So this year I broke the absolute clean and press world record, which was set at 217 kilos. I did 216 kilos in the gym and 218 kilos in competition. As a general training principle, it takes so much out of your nervous system to push to those limits for us, because we're so close to know our genetic limit, that what you see in competition is probably, for 99% of guys, the best that they've done in that training block. And I'll let Martins speak as well, but Martins, I competed against him a handful of times, and he was absolutely notorious for looking relatively ordinary 3 or 4 weeks out from a show, and then somehow he's added all of this tremendous strength. So I assume that's gonna lead to his answer as well.
There was only one motion I ever did in training that I never replicated in a competition. That was a stone of steel, what would have been a world record, to 56 inches at 510 pounds using a tacky towel. Other than that, everything in training, I just treat technique and speed meticulously, but not necessarily overload it to the point where my body starts to break down. So yes, all my heaviest lifts, pretty much, other than that stone, have been in competition.
And if you're trying to convert the 216 kilos converts to what?
I have no clue.
Well, 220 is about 484, right?
I think.
All right, we're gonna go back to the back of the ring here. Because I know we don't all think in kilos. Oh. It's her turn. No, it's her turn. Right here.
Somebody.
Thank you for taking the mic.
Question for the strong men in the room. What's y'all's relationship with food? I find that my little exposure with bodybuilders and a lot of hardcore weightlifters, it seems like a lot of chicken and rice. Do y'all get to enjoy your meals, or is it just punching on the macros?
We'll eat you if you stay still.
One Barson.
So, and I apologize for misnaming you earlier. I apologize. It was the hair, the way your hair.
Am I at least pretty?
Very attractive. But what you didn't hear, I'm going to say up here, was they said the relationship to food is like very strong. You know, very strong. Yeah, I mean, eating is, when I see the athletes at the Arnold, I can just say this, like a lot of them have bags with like special pouches, and they carry all their food with them. And so, and you're in contest mode, you're going very, very careful about protein, carbs, all of the things, such as macronutrients, all of that sort of stuff. And that's a science that's just as much a science as like figuring out the sets and repetition. Martins, go ahead.
I mean, for me, unlike a lot of strongmen, I was a hard gainer. It took me a lot of effort to get my body weight up to where it is at now and beyond. In the beginning, I felt like I was stuffing myself constantly. The main thing I was really just focusing on was hitting a set amount of protein per day. Everything else was just whatever calories I could get in as easy as possible. That's what I was focusing on. And it got to a point where my cheat day or cheat meal was not eating, because I got kind of grossed out and disgusted by food. But eventually my metabolism caught up and my weight stabilized, and then I could start enjoying myself a little bit more and not stuffing myself to that point where I was disgusted by the sight of food. I'm sure it's quite different for Mitch. He's got a great relationship with it.
Yeah, I love food. But it's a big challenge in the sport, because I believe that I've changed some perspective on what you have to be the best strongman in the world. Historically, it's been people well over 400 pounds. At the Arnold's, second place was about 375. Third place, he was 450. And there's other major competitors who are well over 400 pounds as well. But if you're obese, the systemic inflammation that comes from that is inhibitory to your performance and your recovery. On the flip side, you have to be a little bit fat, because if you're not, we've got like these large objects that we're holding against our body. Sometimes you have to roll them up your body. And if you were like super chiseled and lean, first of all, you just won't be strong. Your joints will feel dry. You'll feel sore. You'll get injured. But it's also just physics that it becomes harder to lift an Atlas stone if you don't have some sort of belly or something to rest it on. So for me, when it comes to food, I think I would rather not eat than eat something horrible. That being said, it's like 80-20 rule. I was carbing up with popcorn and pretzels before this, so it's not like bodybuilder. Thank you, Mark. It's not bodybuilder chicken and rice. But I think the days of thriving in strongman off of pizza and ice cream YouTube videos are probably over.
We can take one more question. I want to just shout out, and I had somebody right here in the front. I wanted to, sorry, hang on. I wanted to say something. Right. And that was in the back of the room, as you may have noticed, there's a table, and the good people from Half Price Books are here, and they're selling books. And we're going to probably wrap up Q&A. I'm not going to immediately leave the room in just a minute. We'll take a couple more questions since there's some hands up. But the table's back there in case you'd like to buy a book. Michael's here. He'd be happy to sign books for you. The other guys will be happy to sign your books for you as well if you'd like to take home a copy of the book. I will say it's a really remarkable book, and I gave a copy of it to every single competitor at the Arnold Classic this year, and I gave a little speech there. And I do think that it may be a book that really does sort of change our narrative about how we feel about strength. So don't forget about them in the back of the room in case, because we actually you might like to sort of take one home. And with that, I had a couple, we got several hands. One was right here, and then I'll take that person, and then there's somebody back here. Well, and you're going to be the last one, Sally.
So I'm a physical therapist, and I just have a question. It's kind of for, I guess, both of you strongmen and then Michael too. As a therapist, obviously we're building strength, but also we're really concerned about mobility. So joint mobility. You know, I think about hip extension and rotation. You can't walk normally if you don't have good hip extension. How do you guys, I guess two questions. How do you guys maintain good mobility when you have so much muscle bulk? And for Michael, did you delve into that at all as you worked on the strength piece? I was just curious.
So this is the work that I do at my clinic. This is my profession as well. When it comes to us, the general principle, and actually Martins changed my stance on this a little bit. We just need the requisite mobility to do what we need to do comfortably. And if we can do that, then there's no need for us to be able to do the splits because we have the mobility stability continuum. You become more mobile, you become less stable, which is why subluxing the shoulder is very common, but subluxing the hip is almost impossible unless you're in a car accident. And so for me, that's it. In terms of programming mobility, I have a very strong opinion that stretching, particularly for guys of our size, is relatively useless without load. And so if I need to get a deeper squat, I know that I need 300 to 400 pounds on a bar on my shoulders to actually feel like it's opening my hips up to start to feel like I'm stretching. And so for me, that's it. Stretching under load, in my professional opinion, is 100% the way to go. Because the worst thing, in my opinion, that you could do is give someone range of motion that they don't have control over. And so instead of doing a hamstring stretch, doing Romanian deadlifts, instead of doing back minor stretch, doing dumbbell flies, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's generally how I manage.
I personally do love to stretch, but I typically stretch anything that feels like it's inhibiting a specific movement pattern. For example, it's really important, like Mitch was saying, to not have any tension that inhibits movement. So if I'm going for an overhead press, without weight, it better feel fluid and easy. Otherwise, if I have to work against my muscle tension in any way, that is pounds lost in that direction that I'm trying to exhibit force. So if I want to get good overhead, I like to make sure that my lats and pecs are loose enough, just to the point where I could put my hands or arms in the position that I need to with under load. But with that said, I also believe in PNF stretching and then also strengthening the muscles and that movement in that new range that you've developed. So they have to go hand in hand together. Absolutely.
So I don't go deeply into flexibility or stretching in the book. Maria Fiatarone Singh's research, which is what the whole last third of the book is built around, is really looking at mainly strength in aging, strength in chronic disease, some for strength in adolescence. Her position, based on research, is that for most people, high intensity strength training through a full range of motion is flexibility training, that it gives as much or more as any static stretching. And I think numerous position statements have come to that conclusion by now too.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one other thing. So I was also a strength coach at UCLA for multiple years. And one of the other issues is injuries relative to mobility. And I think another part of this, when we think about the importance of strength, is muscular balance and what exercise selection we're doing. A lot of what we would see as being immobile and needing more stretching is actually just a function of weakness in certain other patterns. And so thinking about movement patterns and strength and what exercises we're actually selecting to be strong can improve mobility, perhaps more so than stretching alone.
All right, now we got more hands up, but
Well, it's more of a addition to being a strong man. Active release therapy is more important than stretching because you gotta alleviate the binding in the fascia. All strong men have issues with tears and stuff like that because you might get a cramp and not even realize you shake it off. Ah, it's okay. But then if you don't have somebody to get in there deep and dig that out, you're gonna get a tear. I was blessed to be able to have Jan Todd and Terry Todd advising me every day of my life since I was 14. So I didn't have a lot of injuries. You talk about lifting heavy to your maxes. I lift heavy in the competition. I challenged the competition. Like I wasn't allowed to go and train too heavy. Terry was like, let the well fill up. So like it's a lot more to it. It is a science.
well, Terry always was a great believer that we sometimes overtrain and we don't rest enough.
Yeah.
And so you don't allow enough recovery time. And I think that's the thing that people really do.
That's a really valuable thing. If anyone wants to talk to Mark one-on-one about his active release, maybe we'll do that after as well.
So I was going to say, you guys may know this, you may not, but Mark Henry was twice in the Olympic Games as America's best weightlifter, rather, and then was in the games in 92 and 96, and then he had a long career with World Wrestling Federation. He's in the World WWE Hall of Fame. He's now part owner of his own wrestling conglomeration, whatever it is, out in the Caribbean. And so Mark is really, really active still with athletes at all levels. And his two kids, I have to say, I'm very proud to be grandma Jane to those kids because they are amazing athletes, both of them. All right, we have one last question, and because it came with Michael, it's yours, if you want it. Now we got one more question. We have to make sure to move on. All right, I think I promised Gally, if that's okay. That's fine. All right, Gally.
Hi, thank you so much. First, I want to say thank you for this amazing presentation. And the last slide, I think, with the old lady along strongman was epic. I think my professor here from sports media class would agree. And a question, I've been a sprint kayak coach myself and kayak polo player. I'm really interested about your background of whitewater kayaking, and so my question is just to hear a little bit more about that, and if you need a recommendation of a sprint whitewater park nearby, I have it.
Thank you. I'm afraid it's a pretty short story. I set out to, I was thinking that my next book would be about waterfalls. I got really interested in the people who get in little boats and go over big waterfalls. And I thought to understand what they do, it would be interesting to do that on a much smaller level. So that was my original goal in learning to kayak. But I basically just decided that my particular injury profile didn't make that a particularly good idea. And so I went to a great whitewater kayaking school for, 10 days in Northern California. I had a great experience and I felt like it was time to put up the paddle and just go back to the weights.